It's my pleasure to be up here to introduce I think, a very esteemed panel. Our theme today is shifts in technology investing, and you know, all three are pretty accomplished, but they come from different backgrounds, but all pretty successful in what they do. So first I'd like to introduce Jason Spivak. He's the CEO of Ring Revenue and a director of Persistence Partners, which is a VC based in the Santa Barbara area. Gary Rieschel, managing director of Qiming Venture Partners, based out of, interestingly, Shanghai. So I'm looking forward to what Gary has to say, especially with all the big movements in China. And then also Bruce Dines, vice president of LGI Ventures, which is a division of Liberty Global. And I like the timing of the subject of shifts in technology investing because there have been a lot of big changes lately. Some of the Jobs Act, and underneath the Jobs Act is crowdfunding, and also the effects that has on Sarbanes-Oxley, and also the secondary marketplace. So I wonder if you guys could go ahead and comment on that and take turns on this.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate the chance to participate. It's actually my first FiRe conference. I've been reading Mark's newsletter now for close to a year, and it certainly will be the first of many after having the chance to be here today. The experience of just walking down the hall and just happening to pass three impressive independent filmmakers chatting it up out there in a conversation you can step into and learn so much from is an amazing experience. John, you asked about specifically the Jobs Act and the crowdfunding component of that. I think I've got a little bit of a unique perspective there as a result of being a repeat entrepreneur, having launched several software companies and taken them public, as well as being a venture capital investor. And I think my perspective may be a little bit different than Gary's or Bruce's, so I will go quickly here. I think it makes for great political season eye candy, especially when you name it, something like the Jobs Act. But I think the practical reality of crowd-funded early stage opportunities really doesn't, it's not going to achieve its intended purpose here because there are a lot of reasons why, but the short answer is that the folks that this enables to come in and do early stage investing, if I understand the law correctly, it's capped at $10,000 per individual investor and $1 million per crowd-funded round or something in that range, and you guys may actually know better. But it opens up early stage investing to people that for the most part are not savvy investors, they are not smart money, and they can't actually afford to do this kind of investing. So I don't really think that the best deals are going to find their way toward crowdfunding. There's significant challenges around a small company needing to manage dozens or hundreds of investors for whom, by definition, their $1,000, their $5,000 is a meaningful amount of money to them. I can tell you, as someone who started a few companies and tried to minimize that cap table, you don't want 100 investors for whom the amount of money they invested is important to them. So I think there's some great challenges there, not the least of which is the deals that will find their way down that path. Frankly, they're the deals that didn't get funded through traditional channels for the most part. That's not going to be the first place you go for capital because it's challenging. Frankly, I think there are better models out there like customer funding. For example, some of you may be familiar with a website called Kickstarter. I have no affiliation with it other than I buy stuff there, but go check it out if you haven't seen it. It's a very different model of crowdfunding where small companies present the product or service they'd like to deliver. If they get essentially enough pre-orders, they will then soft circle and take all the money, and you actually get a version of their product as an early customer. It's an amazing model. Order great stuff for the kids off there all the time. But I think customer-funded models are much more sustainable than what they're calling crowdfunding as part of the Jobs Act today.
Yeah, I think obviously we invest in China, so the Jobs Act is not going to be terribly relevant. I agree with the eye candy comment because I can't quite understand what the long-term benefit is of the entire program. I think for us, what's interesting is to think about how the venture model is changing, and we can talk about sectors later. But at a very high level, something has started to separate, which used to all be nicely contained. That's a combination of invention, innovation, and commercialization. So it used to be that you would invent an idea, you'd come up with an idea or a product or a technology, And then you'd cycle on that. You'd iterate on that either in the marketplace or through prototypes before it was commercialized. And that function used to occur, all those functions used to occur within a single geography. And what we're starting to see for the first time is that really starting to separate. So the US still, to a large degree, is the cradle of invention. To a lesser degree, it continues to be the cradle of innovation. For example, in the handset market, I think China announced now they have 1 billion handsets installed. There are something like 45% of the world's handsets being sold this year will be sold into China. Africa's leading the world in terms of mobile payment systems. So clearly, when you start to provide this, when you have this consumerization of technology, the need that consumer has is going to drive a great deal of innovation, even if it's adaptive. There's going to be a lot of innovation there. So I think you're going to continue to have innovation primarily in the West, and particularly the United States. You're going to see innovation start to be spread. And then I think what you're really going to see is commercialization occur largely outside the United States and outside of developed countries. Part of that simply, it just takes so much less time, so much less money to get things commercialized, especially anything in clean tech or healthcare. And we can talk about that in more detail.
Excuse me, Bruce.
Well, a couple thoughts come to my mind. First of all, this concept of innovation, and you know, Liberty Global is a global investor, so we're active both outside the U.S. as well as inside the U.S. And there's no question when I travel around to other places in the world that there is an immense amount of innovation that is occurring elsewhere. We now have 20% of our portfolio invested in Israel. And it has emerged really, in my view, as the #2 global innovation center, which is remarkable when you think about the fact that the country is about the size of a postage stamp. And it's interesting to me because I think much of it is the result of the cultural heritage. I feel that way about how Silicon Valley emerged as well. I mean, there's been a lot of studies done, and you can look at the fact that you know, Stanford combined with Xerox PARC, and you know, you had an HP and a Cisco that emerged early on, and all of that sort of led to this phenomenon that we know now of Silicon Valley. But I think there's a cultural heritage that's missed in that kind of explanation that has a lot to do with the pioneering spirit of people who moved west. And if you think about it, we're not that far removed generationally from folks who fought in the Civil War and whose parents came across the Great Plains in covered wagons. And the same thing's true in Israel. They're only 3 generations removed from the people who founded that country, and so the pioneering spirit is very much alive and existent there, and that's one of the reasons that you know, we've made a strategic decision to invest time and energy in following the technology trends that are emerging from that country.
Thank you. I'll make a comment about Sarbanes-Oxley. As an angel investor for 15 years, most angels were not too happy when that law came out because government has always had good intent, but they don't always come up with the right rules in order to regulate properly. So it took away the ability to have really maximum exit valuations because of all the arduous costs involved in meeting all the financial auditing that they had to do under Sarbanes-Oxley. So now that shroud and hopefully will be lifted off with the Jobs Act, we're excited again that we can get maximum valuations. Companies who would normally buy the startups, they know that they can't really go IPO where it's very difficult for them because they can't get the money to get that far to begin with. So those valuations went down, but yet the risks stayed the same. And that has been a big disappointment for the angel investor. So some of the sectors that I've highlighted as far as where I think there's going to be good growth is healthcare. We already saw a couple of fire starters here for good reason addressing that particular area because of the technology, excuse me, and also education, agriculture, and then IT security. Any comments wrapped around those particular areas?
I guess I would offer that one of the things you'll see, I think, with healthcare, agriculture, education, government, God help us, in particular, is that you have an efficiency play that you're having for the first time. You had the enterprises enterprise adopt technology early with the PC, databases, et cetera. And then with the internet, that flipped to the consumer. Over the last decade, it's really been driven by the consumer. And now, even the organizations that are most resistant to change, which really are the healthcare industry, the education, government, now even they have to change. You're kind of running out of excuses. And so I think that the efficiency play around this is something that, for venture investors, you have to have a pretty strong stomach to invest in things that provide services to the government. I've lost, I think, $26 million in 2 deals trying to improve government efficiency back in the 2000 to 2003 timeframe. I will try again. We might even try with the Chinese government, which is really a stretch. So I think that the reality is the time is right for that, because now the technology platforms there, plus the fact that consumers are demanding it, and they don't really have as much of a choice. Healthcare to us, if I look specifically within China, healthcare is the single biggest investment opportunity for us, and it's because 4 things line up there for the first time. Number 1, the government policy. Number 2, every major foreign multinational has invested heavily in China in R&D, distribution, and product development as a first-tier market now instead of a second or tertiary market. Number 3, people are getting wealthy, so as they're rich people, they want to live longer, so it's kind of basic stuff. And then number 4, unfortunately for the country, it's now the hotbed of lifestyle disease growth. It's the largest diabetic population on Earth, quickly becoming the largest cardiac disease population on Earth. So I think all those things lining up for just a phenomenal opportunity to invest in healthcare over the next decade in China.
Excellent. Do you worry at all about the lack of financial controls, because it's kind of the wild, wild west out there?
So actually, it's interesting to talk about financial controls with what Facebook just did. You know, I actually think that the reality is everyone gets greedy, and it's just a question of degree. China's financial controls, there's a lot of really good companies, and unfortunately, there's also been some bad ones. And I think that the government policy is in the right direction. They just haven't enforced their own rules. So the joke in China, there's a rule for everything, and it would become hell if they ever enforced all of them. Well, but it would be nice if they enforced certain of them. And I think that you're getting to that point. So we have to do extraordinary diligence on finances when we invest in China. We have to rebuild financial statements from scratch in many cases, things you would never think of doing in the US. So you have to do more diligence, but you can do the diligence. So it's not that you can't do it. It's really people get lazy and they take shortcuts, but you can do it if you put your mind to it.
Gary, last thing related to China. Do you have any comments wrapped around the intellectual property concerns? I think last year you had an opinion about it. Has that migrated?
So Mark and I disagree pretty violently on this issue. So I think that the IP issue vis-a-vis China now is being used as an excuse. It is not really a reason to not go to China. I think people beat up on GE. I will tell you, I know the head of avionics for GE really, really well, John Watkins there. They are very, very bright people. And they map out very carefully where the Chinese are going to be with all the help they're going to give them in 10 years when GE actually is on an entirely different platform. So you have to be careful. You have to be smart. And quit. I mean, it's amazing to me. You'll be sitting in your office. You'll meet someone and say, oh, I landed in China for a week and I found the perfect partner. You're kidding me. Give me a break. And it's just, people take shortcuts and they don't do the work. So you can find, we've done 3 large technology transfer deals into joint ventures now with state-owned enterprises in China. So you can do it and you can provide the air cover for yourself, but you have to be thoughtful and take the time.
You know, each of you have mentioned the point about the internationalizing of technology development and the separation of innovation continuing to occur in the West and implementation and scale coming out of emerging nations in the East. We have a software company based in Santa Barbara, not too far from here, and we license technology to the big ad networks like ValueClick and Google and the others. I did not expect when we launched this business that, for example, this morning before being on this panel, I've already been on the phone with Hong Kong and Beirut with regard to our implementations there. So we have everything we do in the Amazon Web Services Cloud, but for an implementation in China, in order to preserve our IP, we're actually needed to find a private cloud host, essentially a boxed cloud in China where we can implement our services there with some degree of or at least some perception of control over it. So there are extra steps you need to take, but I agree with you that the concerns about IP theft are convenient air cover for folks who haven't yet figured out how to step into that very large market.
Last comment I'll make on China is going back to one of my themes on agriculture. People don't have to eat rice and beans in the masses like they used to, so we got tremendous wealth building all at one time. That's going to put tremendous strains on the ability to generate the food that's in demand. And farmers are getting older and older. I don't know too many young people who are majoring in agriculture. So it seems like a big gap's going to be building there. What is your...
Just a quick summary. Urbanization, I think globally, urbanization is a trend that probably drives almost everything that we're interested in doing for the next 20, 30 years, maybe longer. China's urbanizing 30 million people a year. They've taken it's the first year, last year was the first year there are more people living in urban areas in China than living in the countryside. So they are urbanizing partly because it's easier to provide education, healthcare, et cetera, partly because it's easier to control the population, and partly because it's easier to improve agriculture, because you get away from these micro plots that is very hard to improve efficiency on. If they don't solve their problems with agricultural efficiency, they are in a world of hurt. They don't have the water resources that they need, and the only way they're going to solve that problem is by getting people off the land and being able to make that more efficient. Huge problem for China.
Either one of you have any other comments related to China? No?
I don't have any comments related to China. We do look at deals from China. We've not made an investment there at this point in time. But one of the trends that you didn't mention that is certainly important to us at Liberty Global, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Liberty Global, the easiest way to think of us is this Comcast overseas. We're the largest international cable operator. So I follow the digital media world very closely and really invest in that particular area. And we talked about some of the macro trends that I see occurring there. And on the one hand, essentially you have all of the world's media that is now digitized. And you've got, on the other side, this proliferation of devices. In the middle, you've got essentially in developed countries anyway, ubiquitous access. And that's really changing the face of content consumption as we've traditionally known it. And a lot of the trends that I'm focused on and we're placing bets in are around how that content gets consumed, from the ingestion and transcoding needed to get out to different video player formats, to video compression. Obviously, particularly HD video puts a tremendous amount of pressure on bandwidth. So how does that get managed through video compression technologies, through edge caching, through the rollout of DOCSIS 3.0? It changes the face of the traditional old EPG that people are used to kind of scrolling through. And we're now very focused on the whole concept of content search and discovery, and also recommendation. I'd say a second trend that we're focused on is now the ability to capture metadata, but go beyond that and do frame-by-frame video data tagging. So how do we do landscape recognition? How do we do facial recognition? How do we do audio and text recognition such that a consumer can literally go to a scene or to an actor or to a phrase in a movie and find it immediately? The data tagging also opens up an entire world of second screen applications that just naturally create a more enhanced and richer viewing experience. I think a lot of you have probably on YouTube and have followed YouTube's channelization strategy. It's something we're very focused on monitoring and following as well. You've got companies like Vivo, companies like Machinima, Maker, Alloy TV, who have built literally billions of video view audiences in a relatively short period of time. And now that Google's got this YouTube strategy, what we're seeing is a real change in the face of advertising. So Google is trying to disrupt the traditional broadcast advertising model in the same exact way that they interrupted the old print model. And they're doing it through this offering up a capability called, that they refer to internally as TrueView, but they're only going to charge the advertiser in the event that the consumer watches the ad all the way through. Now, they've got the ability to tell that and report that back to the advertiser. So it's a very interesting juxtaposition. Here you've got YouTube's TrueView initiative juxtaposed against EchoStar's recent announcement that they now have a box that will automatically skip all the broadcast ads. And how do you bring those two worlds together? And it's really done in the sense of the ability now to use this metadata tagging capability to do contextual advertising and bring advertising to the consumer that is relevant to the program or to the household or to the interest in such a way that they want to stay and view the ad. And so I see a huge opportunity in advertising. And we've taken some bets in this whole ad tech space that revolve around second screen applications, around contextual commerce, around contextual advertising, around contextual messaging, that is really bringing a high degree of relevance back into the traditional video model that doesn't exist under the old broadcast model. The last thing I'll mention, I mean, obviously, cloud, big data, all those things help support these massive trends. But the last thing I'll talk briefly about is the whole concept of natural language processing and a voice user interface. That's another area that I'm very excited about relative to how people interface with their digital media. And we'll see more and more of this. Nuances here, there's a company called Vlingo. There's other startups that are out there focused on contextual voice and natural language processing that are going to change the way we interact with media in general.
Thank you, Bruce. Also, I would just have you elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned that one of your key focuses as far as being international is Israel. And why is Israel so far ahead of everyone else in the particular areas that you specialize in? You seem to have a big attraction towards.
Well, it's efficient. It's as efficient as Silicon Valley. You go to Tel Aviv and Herzliya, and you can visit 30 VCs in 3 days. So, we've developed some syndication relationships over there. And of course, there's all the substructure. There's government support. The Office of the Chief Scientist there provides very long-term, low-interest loans to startups. And it's a convertible instrument, so they can convert it to equity if the business takes off. And there's a lot of interesting tech transfer that comes out of both the university system and the military system.
Thank you. And Gary, any comments on clean tech? That was a pretty big theme the last two FiRe conferences.
So
everybody's quieted down.
Yeah, everyone's licking their wounds. I think in clean tech, the thing that happened was people missed the increasing risk you have of commercialization. So even batteries, we were just talking about the necessity for new battery technology. It's really hard to find a new commercial battery technology that's been commercialized in the last 10 to 12 years. It's really hard to find, not for lack of trying. I think there's 30 companies we visited in China alone with some new battery chemistry that they're trying to commercialize. It's just really difficult. So I think what's happened is the gap between what you could do on a bench or what you could do on a small scale, people they think in their minds, well, Moore's law. So as you make more and more and more, the geometries improve, yields go up, your costs go down. Well, the problem with the clean tech world and virtually everything in material science is as you try to make more of something, the risks actually go up. They don't go down. And so if you're trying to manufacture more and more solar panels, you're trying to manufacture more and more wind turbines, it's your manufacturing processes that get in trouble. Biofuels, it's handling the volume of material that you need to handle. that gets you in trouble. So that goes back to the earlier point I made. That's why you're going to see virtually every clean tech company is going to be looking to commercialize somewhere outside the United States. They literally cannot afford the time or the money to commercialize in the US, and the venture market here is almost completely evaporated now for that kind of financing.
Thank you very much. Looks like we're just about out of time. Are there any questions for any of the three panelists? Kamaran.
There's one right there.
You have to walk back, Cameron.
A couple of comments I wanted to make. One is one disturbing trend that I see, and I guess Gary talked about it a little bit. In Silicon Valley, I was just looking this morning at 25 hottest startups that you cannot ignore by Business Insider. And majority of them, more than 20 of them, had very little technology there. It was all, you know, a new vertical on some sort of social network or some sort of service, how to get your valet things get done faster, or somebody deliver something for you sooner or whatever, which is quite disturbing if you have some new innovation in deep technology. Right now, very few venture capital funds in Silicon Valley are in a position to support that, whether it's semiconductors, materials, any new development that requires a lot of money and energy. Second thing is talking again about China. I was just in China last week, and for the first time in my life, I shouldn't say first time, second time in my life, in 1987, I had a chance to travel a little bit in the southern China before it had opened up. And this time I was with my wife, and we traveled quite nicely in southern China, most of it by car. And the amount of investments that China has made within its rural area, having national highway, most beautiful 2-3 lanes, some places 4-5 lane, beautiful freeways, and going to some national parks that were just gorgeous. The infrastructure, the people who were handling it, how clean it was. And as an American, it was egg on my face to hear every day how our national parks are being reduced and the costs go away and our infrastructure is crumbling. I mean, we really are putting a lot of our emphasis in the wrong areas by cutting and cutting and cutting and trying to let go of some beautiful highways that we have had and the bridges and the national parks. So those were two observations I had.
Thank you.
If I could just make, so China's going to get hardware right. In fact, China generally has gotten hardware right. To the point of the theme of the conference, integration they don't necessarily get right yet. And the pure software and human resource side, they have a long, long, long way to go. But if you go and you just look at what they physically have put in place, it's amazing in the last 20 years.
And there's a whole separate discussion to have there between innovation and implementation and scale, right? They aren't doing innovation as well yet as it's being done in the West, but they're able to adopt, optimize, and scale implementations. And I frankly love the innovation side.
I'd like to thank Jason, Gary, and Bruce for joining us, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.